Welcome back. Amidst the diplomatic showdown between India and Canada after the MEA's assertion for parity, claiming that there is interference by Canada in India's internal affairs, Canada has now withdrawn as many as 41 of their diplomats. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly has said that the move comes after India removed diplomatic immunities, once setting the deadline of October 10th for the exit of these diplomats. Now, all in-person services in Canadian consulates in Mumbai, Chandigarh and Bengaluru have been suspended. Canada is also saying that the move breaches international law and even said that it will not distract the government from the Nijjar investigation. It also comes as posters threatening Prime Minister Modi, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar and the Indian High Commissioner to Canada have once again appeared in Surrey, again showing that the Trudea government is unable to have a handle on Khalistani radicals. The External Affairs Ministry has said that demanding parity does not amount to the violation of international law, adding that the government rejects any attempt at misrepresenting the situation. But with no thaw in sight, are we at a point of no return diplomatically between New Delhi and Ottawa?
Insofar as discussions on parity, as we mentioned earlier, given the much higher diplomatic presence of Canadian diplomats or diplomatic presence here in Canada and their continuing interference in our internal affairs, we had and we have sought parity in our respective diplomatic presence. Discussions are ongoing on the modalities of achieving this. As we mentioned, I think last week, given that Canadian diplomatic presence is very much higher, we would assume that there would be a reduction.
As of now, I can confirm that India has formally conveyed its plan to unilaterally remove diplomatic immunities for all but 21 Canadian diplomats and dependents in Delhi by tomorrow, October 20th. This means 41 Canadian diplomats and their 42 dependents were in danger of having immunity stripped on an arbitrary date, and this would put their personal safety at risk. The safety of Canadians and of our diplomats is always my top concern. Given the implications of India's actions on the safety of our diplomats, we have facilitated their safe departure from India.
Let me now go across to our two guests who are joining us. Former Secretary in the MEA, Vivek Kajju, is joining us, and Terry Miliuski is author Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Project. Terry Miliuski, the point is, Canada is saying this is an international law violation and that this goes against conventions and so on and so forth. All that India has asked for is parity. You can't have 40 diplomats from one country and 20 from the other side. That's as simple as that.
Well, both sides are playing games with numbers. To be honest, it's all a bit of a distraction. It doesn't get us any closer to a resolution of the real problem between the two countries. But consider first that Canada is playing games, I think, with the notion that this is somehow illegal. Well, you don't get diplomatic immunity if you're not a diplomat, and if you get kicked out, you're not a diplomat anymore. It's really rather silly to me. But on the other hand, India's indulging, I'm afraid, in some silliness of its own, saying, oh, well, we've only got 21 diplomats in Canada. Well, you're not counting the consulates that you have in Vancouver and Toronto. And number one. Number two, if you go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of India's own website, you'll see that there are 36 diplomats, not 21, who are currently accredited to work in Canada. And in fact, if you add them all up, by those who are registered in Ottawa, all of the foreign affairs officials who are able to work in Canada, who are already registered on the registry as diplomats, able to work with diplomatic immunity in Canada, you get to about more than 60. So everyone's playing games and trying to make something out of nothing. This gets us nowhere, as I say, in terms of dealing with the actual problem which caused all of this. And in the short term, what's going to happen with all of these diplomatic reductions is that mainly it's going to be Indians that are going to get hurt. It's going to be Indian tourists can't get visas. It's going to be Indian business that can't go to Canada. It's going to be Indian students, of which there is a huge lineup who can't get visas. It's a big business for Canada, yes, but it's Indian students that are going to suffer when they've got endless backlogs. They can't get their visas because they're not getting processed on time. We have like 100,000 just this year Indian students coming to Canada. 300,000 here already. There are a lot of Indians who are going to be suffering as a result of these reductions.
So, Vivek Arju, what would your response be as a former diplomat? One, Mr. Miliuski is saying the numbers are all completely all over the place. He says it's not 21. As per the MEA's own website, according to him, has 60-odd Indian diplomats across 3 missions there. And more importantly, we're already seeing the fallout of it. Canada has announced that because of this reduction to 21 diplomats, all in-person services are halted in their consulates in Mumbai, Chandigarh and Bengaluru. And Mr. Miliuski's point is that is going to hurt Indian people who want to go to Canada more than the other way around.
3 points, Zaka. The first, I think the Canadian Foreign Minister was completely wrong when she said that India violated any international norms or the Vienna Convention in asking for the withdrawal of Canadian diplomats. It's the sovereign right of any state to prescribe the number of diplomats it will accept from a sending state. And it is, of course, open to the sending state to prescribe the number of diplomats that it would accept. Normally, these things work on parity, and it's, of course, open to Canada if they feel that India has more diplomats to ask for the withdrawal of Indian diplomats. So let's keep that aside. Second, I think Terry was right that Indian students would suffer, but I would imagine that in the presence of Indian students, which he considered himself, brings great business to Canadian educational institutions. After all, Canada does not accept Indian students out of altruism. I have not heard Terry say that all these Indian students are paid for by Canada. So, Terry, I would suggest that be a little cautious here. When it comes to educational business, your people are making a hell of a lot of money out of Indian students. So let's not get sanctimonious on this. Just let me conclude. I mean, sanctimoniousness would get us nowhere. Third point, I do think, as I've urged in my writings occasionally, that and on TV interviews, that this is an important relationship and that there is need for quiet diplomacy to study all aspects of it. India has perfectly legitimate grievances on Canada. It is absolutely untenable for Canada to say that its laws cannot be changed. And therefore, the kind of floats that was shown about the glorification of Indira Gandhi's assassination, well, the Canadian government, except for just condemning them, cannot take any legal action against people who are doing this.
Yeah, no, Mr. Miliuski, I think there's a point, Indian diplomats, including the High Commissioner, their cutouts were put outside the High Commission. There were posters with targets on their back. Surely you don't expect diplomats to be working in such a hostile environment. I can't remember, anybody putting out a target on the Canadian High Commissioner's back here in India and posters being burnt and so on.
And you won't find anyone louder than me over the past 20 years complaining about Canada's tolerance and permissive attitude towards Khalistani threats of violence. I've been campaigning on this point, not that anyone's been listening to me, as I say, for a couple of decades now, if not more. So we agree about that. And these latest threats against Mr. Modi, against Dr. Jaishankar, these are intolerable and they should not be tolerated. There should be action taken by the authorities. No question about that. But none of this, I submit to you, really gets us anywhere in terms of dealing with the problem of what happens if the Prime Minister of Canada discovers intelligence which persuades him that it's credible to think that somebody that had something to do with the Indian government came to Canada, carried out an extrajudicial murder of a Canadian citizen and expects to get away with it.
But I mean, Mr. Miliuski, it's been over a month and we haven't seen either in the public domain or in private that evidence being shared with the Indian authorities. So if they did have that evidence,
right.
I'm assuming that in the last month they would have shared that. But Vivek Arju, I'll give you the final word. And I think I'm coming back to that point because, yes, while Indian students and Indian tourists are not going there for altruistic reasons, fact is a hell of a lot of them are going. And now none of them will be able to go, or at least their visas and the processing times will be far, far delayed because all of it will have to come to Delhi.
That is why, Zaka, I'm saying that there is need for quiet diplomacy. But somehow or the other, I get the feeling that Terry thinks that the Canadians cannot take action because of Canadian law. Now change Canadian law. Obviously, it's
We agree.
completely
We agree.
unacceptable. It's unacceptable that intrusive questions are asked about our security forces. Canada, I'm saying this to Terry, you are racist. Do you ask questions of Americans who have bombed wedding parties and therefore violated human rights of Afghans when they enter Canada? Do you ask these intrusive questions of them as you ask of our security forces who have served in Kashmir or the Northeast? I mean, come along. There's double standards. If Jaishankar complains of double standards, you are guilty of them. And this sanctimonious attitude that we are above everything else, we are a holy society, we are a law-abiding society.
You just heard me say the exact opposite.
Absolutely.
All right, let's call time.
opposite.
Let's call it time on tonight's face-off, because we are indeed out of time. But thank you very much, Vivek Kaju and Terry Miliuski, for joining us. Like they both said, I think this whole parity and diplomatic sort of back and forth, that is not the real issue. The real issue is, how is Canada allowing this permissive attitude to Khalistani separatists, radicals, and despite this diplomatic low point, that still seems to continue. That needs to stop, and that is the moot point. That's the crux of the matter.